Alright, so I've revamped my skull flattening strategy, and I want to apologize to any of you who have been implementing some of the skull flattening strategies that I have proposed thus far. I realize now that it's too much weight, too much time, and it's having a counterproductive effect. It's not. I don't think it's flattening my skull. I haven't noticed any flattening. I don't think it's. It may be theoretically it could make it worse though. So anyway, I'm going to go over the framework for what initially, in case you've never seen my videos. So what causes male pattern baldness is a bulging in the skull in certain areas, particularly the forehead, the crown, and even the forelock. What this does is it changes the growth pattern and causes subsequent hair loss because the skull contours change. When your skull bulges in certain areas, the sharp angles that separate your forehead from the rest of your head start to round out. So there's a lot of, the shadows are not great. But anyway, you want a sharp vertical forehead that turns sharply into a flat top of the head, and that's, your hairline grows at that angle. When the head starts to bulge, you get a rounding effect in the head. You see a lot of guys with fully progressed male pattern baldness, they have like a total dome head. It's a head totally devoid of sharp contours. So why does that happen? It's because of an overactive sympathetic nervous system and excessive thinking. So what that does is it drives energy up into the head, so you get increased metabolic activity in the brain, which swells the tissues and the fluids, putting outward pressure on the skull, and also creates a lot of activity in the yang meridians, the yang qi meridians in the scalp, which creates surface heat. Now both of those things encourage osteoclasts, which are the bone building, I guess, construction company in your body. They lay down bone and they also resorb the bone. So all that pressure from the inside and then scalp heat and then heat from the yang qi friction on the outside, it encourages the osteoblast to lay down bone layers to protect the brain and also to structurally reinforce the skull from all that pressure and all that surface heat. But you got to protect the brain from the surface heat, and then because of that outward pressure, you got to structurally reinforce. And that's why that Frederick Hosel guy found in his autopsies from 1942 found that all men with male pattern baldness have excessively calcified skull in the sutures, because the sutures are where the skull can break. Right? If you want to structurally reinforce your brain, you have to lay calcium at the sutures. All right, so all that is structurally reinforcing the skull because of outward pressure. So anyway, when those osteoclasts lay down bone, that's when you get the skull bulging. So you can see my forehead, very round right there. All right, so this is right where the prefrontal cortex is. A lot of brain activity, a lot of thinking, strategic thinking occurs in this area. So you're going to get a lot of outward pressure, and then there's a suture that runs along the midline of your skull. So that's where the structural reinforcement has laid down. That's where the bone layers have laid down, or the osteoclasts have laid down bone layers to structurally reinforce my skull from all the activity inside of it and all the, you have yang meridians going right up the front there, the urinary bladder, bam, up and down the back of the head. A lot of yang qi, a lot of heat being generated in this area, laying down bone layers to protect the brain from all that surface heat. But that's very important tissue. So anyway, yeah, so those bone layers change the contours of my hairline or my skull at the hairline, and then I have subsequent pattern loss. So anyway, my old method was like, okay, I know I have to flatten my skull. I have to flatten this forehead area, and I have some bone growth here in the forelock area too. And then I want to prevent future crown bulging so I don't go bald and back. So I was like doing headstands and wall presses into my forehead, into my forelock, and then I was developing all these sand weights, these weighted bean bags to like place on my head, sleep with them on my forehead, and walk around with them all day with them on my head. I looked like an idiot. And then with the sleeping, it was like falling off in the middle of the night, and it was just very frustrating. I had to figure out how to strap it on my head. Anyway, all that was counterproductive because it exacerbates these things and causes the osteoblast to lay down more bone layers. So, for example, headstands. when you do a headstand, especially on a hard surface, but even a soft surface, you're applying a heavy amount of, or heavy mechanical stress load to the skull, right? The whole skull has to support the weight of your body. What that is going to do is it's going to encourage the osteoclast to lay down bone layers at the sutures so that your skull doesn't crack open from you doing the headstand. Right? So more bone layers, you're going to get more bulging and more the more obscuring of the contours. Right? The skull angles are going to change, and your hairline's going to change. Yeah, that's all. You're just encouraging more structural support with those bone layers, with that mechanical stress load. Heavy mechanical stress load is not good. The skull weights, when I would wear the bean bags all day, or I'd sleep in them on my forehead, what that does is it suffocates the tissue in the area, and that triggers the overactive sympathetic nervous system. Right? So the sympathetic nervous system is like you're always on, or you're always in fight or flight. So you're very stressed. You're about you're hypersensitive to stress. That's your disposition. Or you're very active. You talk very fast. Like I'm talking way too fast right now. We've been conditioned to do this just with modern living, but also some people are just more airy and ethery, more vata dosha than others. So we hyper-react with stress, and that shoots up energy into the skull. We start thinking, we start worrying. That's a sympathetic nervous system response. That can also be triggered by, not necessarily like an environmental factor that you're interpreting, and then reacting to consciously. It could also be just when you have the beanbag on the skull, it's going to suffocate some of the tissue, and they're going to panic. They're like, we need more stuff, and that triggers the sympathetic nervous system to respond. There's a stress situation, there's a panic situation, cells are being starved, tissue's being starved of nutrients because of the pressure, and so it's going to upregulate the sympathetic nervous system, and that could encourage the osteoblasts to be more sensitive in the future. Could make you more sensitive to stress. Like it activates the nervous system, sympathetic nervous system, and now you're going to be more, as an organism, more reactive to stress, and then more prone to worrying and thinking, and then bone layers are going to be laid down. But in any case, it's not doing any good. And what it could also do is it could also create more chi friction or chi blockages, with heat friction through chi stagnation. So the chi, when it moves through the body, it moves through the interstitial tissues, and when those get really tight or compressed, then that creates a lot of friction. Like the chi, even though it's an insubstantial substance, an insubstantial energy, it still moves through a physical medium. And so when there's tension in that physical medium, it causes blockages, and that generates heat because of conservation of energy. Chi is going to hit it, and then it's not going to be able to move, and the energy's got to go somewhere, so it creates heat. The more heat that's created in your scalp, the more the osteoblasts are going to lay down bone layers to protect the brain. All right, so you're just encouraging more. You're creating more scalp heat, encouraging more bone layers to get laid down potentially because of the pressure of this long sustained pressure, like all day with like hours with that beanbag on. It's going to create a lot of chi stagnation. It's going to block the chi and create surface heat. And then with the wall presses, I need to slow down. I'm banging. So that's the indication that I need to slow down. I'm talking way too fast. So the wall presses, that's like a combination of both. So you can do the wall presses longer than headstands. And it's still it's not as heavy of a mechanical load, but it's still pretty heavy, and it's more sustained. So you're going to get a little bit of both. Bone layers are going to be laid down because it's high mechanical stress load, and then bone layers are going to get laid down because you're creating a lot of chi stagnation. You're also triggering the sympathetic nervous system to make you more hyper-reactive to future stress situations, especially the body. The body takes on that energy. You start making it trigger happy, it's going to get, or if you start triggering the sympathetic nervous system, it's going to get more and more trigger happy. Lay down more bone layers when it doesn't really have to, in areas where bone layers don't really need to be laid down. So anyway, that's the old method. High mechanical stress load, long sustained periods. So now I'm inverting that. I still think that this is the way that you have to flatten your skull somehow. So how do you do it? How do you do it with the inverse? All right, so what I'm going to do, actually let me go get I'm going to show you my beanbag. so here it is. Now I have an exactly 1 pound beanbag, or it's a sandbag filled with beach sand. And what I do is once a day for 10 minutes, I lay down with my head propped up a little bit, and I have this sit flat on the center of the bulge of my forehead. So I get a bit closer. Bam, 1 pound right there. All right, so laying down and 10 minutes maximum, and only 1 pound. So the rationale for that, why 1 pound only? So 1 pound applies a very low mechanical stress load. So it's not going to stimulate the osteoclast to reinforce the area with more bone layers. There's no need to structurally reinforce when you only have 1 pound applied to your bone. But what it does is it stimulates a piezo-electric charge. So the way the body works is like anytime you touch it, it's like a touchscreen computer or tablet or phone, right? Bodies work the same way. You stimulate a response every time you touch part of your body. It's electrical activity, and it's anything. So piezoelectric is like there's an inherent electrical potential in an object, and then by applying pressure to it, you stimulate the electrical activity. You kind of activate the electrical activity. So that's what I'm doing. You're activating electrical activity, but you're activating it in a certain way. You want to activate it. You want to activate not the osteoblast to lay down the bone, but the osteoclasts, which I believe it's the osteoclasts that resorb the bone. And the way you trigger that is mentally. So actually, it's both. It's both physical and it's mental. So the pressure will trigger the osteoclast to resorb the bone if it's low enough. And then if you add to that effect by mentally focusing on those bone layers being resorbed as you're lying there. So the other part is 10 minutes max. So that avoids any sort of chi stagnation, the chi blockages that create friction, and also a panic triggering the sympathetic nervous system because of suffocation. Right? None of that's going to happen in 10 minutes. You go over 10 minutes, then it'll start to happen. So if you keep it under 10 minutes, then you're not going to create any surface heat, and you're not going to activate your sympathetic nervous system. And then laying down, when you're laying down flat on your back, you are in a parasympathetic state. So it's a total the opposite of sympathetic nervous system. You're totally relaxed. So in that case, the osteoblasts aren't going to be triggered to lay down bone. Very, very unlikely that they would be triggered to lay down bone, right? Because you're totally relaxed. There's no stress. Absolutely zero stress. And why would we structurally reinforce? We're totally relaxed. So anyway, so you're totally relaxed, parasympathetic state. You do it only for 10 minutes, no suffocation. And that piezoelectric charge, with you focusing on the bone layers being resorbed, that's how it's going to flatten out, theoretically. I'm getting attacked by the yellow jacket. All right, so the piezoelectric charge will do it. Even if you don't do it, like don't mentally activate it, the piezoelectric charge and the low weight is going to flatten out the surface because you're in that parasympathetic state. But adding that mental activation, setting an intent, will enhance the effect. And the way I'm doing it is I'm only focusing on one area at a time. So I'm doing it every day for 10 minutes, and then after 24 hours, the piezoelectric charge kind of gets reset, and so you have to do it again. So it lasts for 24 hours. Once you stimulate that activity, it'll last for 24 hours. So you don't have to do it for another day. And if you do it again that day, you'll actually aggravate the situation. You'll start creating panic situations, and it's counterproductive to do it more often. So once per day, only once in a 24-hour period, every day. And I'm just doing one area at a time. So right now I'm focusing on my forehead, doing that for 6 straight months. And then I'll go move to the top of my head and do that for 6 months. All right, so just do one area at a time. If you have 3 areas, if it's here, here, and here, maybe do for 4 months at a time, each area, so rotating. That you can't do two areas at once. You only have 10 minutes and you only have 1 pound. So you have to focus it on one area. At least that's what I'm going with. All right. So just full disclosure, this is exactly what I'm doing. Once per day, 10 minutes. This is sitting on my head. All I'm thinking about is this area getting flattened out. All right. I'm doing that for 6 straight months. That's what I've committed to. So there you go. If If you don't trust me because I've given bad advice in the past, well, whatever. But I think this will work, or I have higher hopes. At least I have hope for this. I think it's a smarter way about going about doing skull flattening. So anyway, this is what I'm trying. There you go.